Lady Caroline Huntington stood at her bedroom window, watching the last of the family heirlooms being loaded onto a merchant's cart. The autumn wind whipped through the nearly barren trees surrounding Rosewood Manor, once the crown jewel of her family's estate, now slipping through her fingers like sand. Her gloved hands clenched the windowsill, knuckles white beneath the fine leather, as the reality of her situation settled deeper into her bones. "My lady," Martha, her last remaining lady's maid, spoke softly from the doorway. "Lord Blackwood has arrived." Caroline closed her eyes briefly, steeling herself. "Show him to the drawing-room. I shall be down momentarily." When Martha departed, Caroline turned to the looking-glass. The woman staring back at her appeared composed, her chestnut hair arranged in a simple but elegant style, her navy blue dress modest yet well-tailored, betraying nothing of the turmoil within. At 24, she was still young, but the past year had carved subtle lines around her eyes that spoke of burdens no young woman should bear. Descending the grand staircase that her ancestors had commissioned 3 generations prior, Caroline mentally rehearsed what she would say to her cousin. Lord Thomas Blackwood had wasted no time claiming his inheritance after her father's death. With no male heir, the entailment had passed to him, a distant relation who had never so much as visited Rosewood until the day he came to claim it. She found him standing by the fireplace, examining a portrait of her father that still hung above the mantel. Though only in his 30s, Thomas had the pinched, calculating look of a much older man. "Cousin," she greeted him with a curtsy so slight it bordered on insult. "Caroline," he replied, not bothering with her title. "I trust your preparations for departure are nearly complete. I plan to have my family moved in by week's end." "How considerate of you to grant me these few extra days," she said, her voice like ice. "Most would have had me removed immediately upon reading of the will." Thomas had the decency to look momentarily uncomfortable. "I'm not without compassion. You have suffered a great loss. Indeed, my father, my home, my position, and my future, all in one fell swoop." "You still have the cottage on the edge of the property," he reminded her. "As stipulated in your father's will." Caroline laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "A gamekeeper's cottage with 2 rooms. How generous!" "It's more than many women in your position would receive," Thomas countered, irritation creeping into his tone. "With no dowry and no marriage prospects, you should be grateful for any provision." The words stung precisely because they contained a kernel of truth. Her father, the Earl of Westmoreland, had gambled away their fortune in his final years, drowning his widower's grief in cards and drink. By the time consumption claimed him, there was little left but debts and the entailed property that Caroline, as a woman, could not inherit. "I have come to discuss another matter," Thomas continued, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "The cottage will need repairs before it is habitable. In the meantime, I have secured you a position." "A position?" Caroline repeated, incredulous. "What sort of position could you possibly imagine appropriate for the daughter of an earl?" "One that will keep you fed," he replied sharply. "My friend Lord Hargrove manages the Duke of Thornfield's estate. They are in need of additional staff at Thornfield Hall. The pay is fair, and you would have room and board." "You expect me to enter service? To become a maid in some duke's household?" Her voice rose despite her efforts to maintain composure. "Not a maid," Thomas clarified with exaggerated patience. "The position is in the stables. The head groom requires an assistant who is educated enough to maintain the breeding records and correspondence." Caroline stared at him, certain this must be some cruel jest. "The stables? You cannot be serious." "I am entirely serious. You have always had a way with horses, have you not? Your father often boasted of your riding skills." He held out the paper. "The position begins next week. I suggest you pack whatever remains of your personal belongings and prepare to depart." Caroline did not take the offered paper. "And if I refuse?" Thomas's expression hardened. "Then you are welcome to make your own arrangements with what little funds remain to you. Perhaps one of your father's friends would take pity on you, though I dare say his reputation in his final years has left few doors open." The truth of his words landed like physical blows. Caroline knew her options were painfully limited. Her father's disgrace had isolated them from society, and her own dowry had been sacrificed years ago to pay creditors. The few distant relatives she might have appealed to had made it clear they had no interest in supporting the daughter of a ruined earl. With trembling fingers, she finally took the paper. "I will consider it." Do more than consider it. Accept it with whatever grace you can muster. Thomas moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. At Thornfield Hall, you will be known simply as Caroline. Your title and connection to the Huntington name would only complicate matters. You wish me to deny my heritage." The last shred of Caroline's self-control was dangerously close to snapping. "I wish you to be practical. The daughter of an earl. Working in stables would be the subject of gossip and speculation. It would reflect poorly on our family name, a name I now bear the responsibility of restoring." After he departed, Caroline stood motionless in the center of the drawing room, surrounded by the ghostly outlines on the walls where paintings had once hung. Everything of value had been sold to pay her father's debts or claimed by Thomas as part of his inheritance. "My lady." Martha appeared at the doorway, concern etched on her kind face. "Is there anything I can bring you?" Caroline looked at her. Faithful servant, one of only two who had remained after the others had been dismissed without their final wages. "No, Martha, but there is something I must tell you. It seems I have been offered a position." Later that evening, Caroline sat at her writing desk, penning a letter to Lord Hargrove, accepting the position at Thornfield Hall. Her hand shook slightly as she signed simply Caroline, omitting the title she had held since birth. When she finished, she moved to her wardrobe and began sorting through her remaining clothes. Most would be wholly inappropriate for her new station. She set aside her simplest day dresses and practical boots, then hesitated over a small wooden box containing her mother's jewelry. The few pieces Thomas hadn't yet discovered and claimed. "These at least shall remain mine," she whispered, tucking the box into the bottom of her trunk beneath layers of clothing. That night, sleep eluded her as she lay in her childhood bed for the final time. Through the window, she could see the silhouette of the stables where she had spent countless happy hours as a girl, learning to ride under her father's proud gaze. How ironic that horses, once her passion, would now become her livelihood. As dawn broke over Rosewood Manor, Caroline rose and dressed in her simplest attire. She braided her hair severely and donned a plain bonnet, studying her reflection one last time. The transformation was beginning, from Lady Caroline Huntington, daughter of the Earl of Westmoreland, to simply Caroline, stable hand at Thornfield Hall. Before leaving her room, she removed a small portrait miniature of her parents from the wall and slipped it into her pocket. Thomas could take her home, her title and her dignity, but he could not take her memories or her determination to survive. Martha was waiting for her in the entrance hall, her own small bag packed. "I'm coming with you, my lady," she stated firmly. When Caroline began to protest, "I won't hear otherwise. If they need help in the stables, they surely need help in the kitchen or laundry as well." Tears threatened to spill from Caroline's eyes at this display of loyalty. "Martha, I cannot ask this of you." "You didn't ask. I decided." The older woman's tone brooked no argument. "Now, shall we depart? The coach Thomas arranged will be here shortly." As they stood waiting, Caroline took one last look around the entrance hall of Rosewood Manor, committing to memory the sweep of the staircase, the pattern of light falling through the stained-glass window above the door, the scent of beeswax, and roses that had always permeated the air. "I will return," she vowed silently. "Somehow, someday, I will reclaim what is rightfully mine." The journey to Thornfield Hall took the better part of a day. As the coach wound through increasingly unfamiliar countryside, Caroline felt as though each mile stretched the thread connecting her to her past life until it was ready to snap completely. By the time the imposing gates of the Thornfield estate came into view, dusk was falling, casting long shadows across the manicured grounds. Thornfield Hall itself was a massive structure of grey stone, at least 3 times the size of Rosewood Manor, with countless windows gleaming gold in the setting sun. The coach continued past the main house, following a smaller path that led to the stable complex, a substantial building in its own right, with adjacent cottages for the staff. An older man with weathered features awaited them, his posture straight, despite his years. "Miss Caroline?" he inquired as she descended from the coach. "Yes," she replied, the absence of her title still strange on her ears. "Robert Miller, head groom." He offered a short bow. "Lord Hargrove informed me of your arrival. Your quarters are prepared in the small cottage adjacent to the main stable. It's modest but clean." Caroline nodded, suddenly too exhausted for speech. The reality of her new position was settling over her like a heavy cloak. "And this is?" Miller asked, glancing at Martha. My friend, Martha Wilson," Caroline managed. "She seeks a position as well. She is experienced in household matters." Miller looked uncertain. "I wasn't informed of a second arrival. Surely there must be need for additional help in such a large household," Caroline pressed, unwilling to be separated from her last connection to Rosewood. After a moment's consideration, Miller nodded. "Mrs. Potter, the housekeeper, mentioned needing another laundress. I'll speak with her in the morning. For tonight, your friend can share your quarters." As they followed Miller to the cottage, Martha whispered, "Friend, is it now? The world has turned upside down indeed." Despite her exhaustion, Caroline felt a small smile tug at her lips. In the midst of everything she had lost, Martha's loyalty and humour remained constant. The cottage was indeed modest, a single room with a small fireplace, a narrow bed, a wash basin, and a chest for belongings. A curtain could be drawn to section off a small area for privacy. After Miller left them with instructions to report to him at first light, Caroline sank onto the edge of the bed. "What have we done, Martha?" she whispered. "We've survived, my lady," Martha replied simply, beginning to unpack their meagre belongings. "That's what women like us do when the world tries to break us. We survive, and we wait for our moment to thrive again." As night descended fully over Thornfield Hall, Caroline tried to take comfort in those words. She was no longer Lady Caroline, Huntington in the eyes of the world, but she would hold tight to that identity in her heart until she could reclaim it properly. Tomorrow would bring the first day of her new life, a life of service rather than privilege, of labor rather than leisure. But as she drifted into an exhausted sleep, one thought sustained her. This was not the end of her story, but merely an unexpected chapter in a tale that was far from finished. What neither Caroline nor Martha could have anticipated was just how dramatically their lives would change when they encountered the master of Thornfield Hall, the notoriously reclusive Duke who, rumour had it, had not left the estate in years, yet whose decisions still managed to shake the foundations of society. And soon enough, Caroline's carefully constructed new identity. Dawn broke over Thornfield Hall, pale light filtering through the cottage's single window. Caroline woke with a momentary disorientation before reality crashed back, the loss of her home, her new position, her dramatic fall in station. Beside Her Martha was already stirring, ever the early riser. "Best prepare yourself, my lady," Martha whispered, still unable to break the habit of addressing Caroline by her title. "First impressions matter, especially now." Caroline nodded, rising to wash in the cold water provided in the basin. She dressed in her plainest gown, a brown woolen thing that had once been reserved for particularly inclement weather at Rosewood. She braided her hair tightly and covered it with a simple cap, studying her reflection in the small mirror Martha held up. The transformation was striking, with her elegant features obscured by the severe styling and plain clothes. She looked like any other working woman. "Will I pass inspection, do you think?" she asked, attempting humor despite the tightness in her chest. "You'll do," Martha replied softly. "Remember, keep your eyes lowered, your voice gentle. Speak only when spoken to. I'm to work with horses, not serve at dinner," Caroline reminded her. "Surely some allowances will be made." Martha's expression remained serious. "Even so, the habits of your upbringing will betray you if you're not careful. Your posture, your diction, the way you naturally command rather than request, these are ingrained." Caroline sighed, acknowledging the truth in Martha's words. "I shall do my best to remember my place." "Your temporary place," Martha corrected firmly. "This is not forever." With that small comfort, Caroline made her way to the main stables as instructed. Robert Miller was already there examining a ledger by lantern light. "Ah, Miss Caroline," he greeted her. "Prompt. That's good. We begin early here and finish when the work is done, not when the clock dictates." "I understand, Mr. Miller," she replied, carefully modulating her voice to sound respectful without being servile. He studied her for a moment. "Lord Hargrove mentioned you have experience with horses and some education. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. I grew up around horses and am comfortable with them. I can read and write, keep accounts, and am familiar with basic veterinary care." Miller nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Your primary responsibilities will be maintaining our breeding records, assisting with correspondence regarding purchases and sales, and helping with the daily care of our most valuable animals. The Duke takes particular pride in his bloodstock." At the mention of the Duke, Caroline couldn't help but ask, "Will I be expected to interact with His Grace directly?" A strange expression crossed Miller's weathered face. "The Duke rarely visits the stables personally these days. You'll report to me and I to Lord Hargrove, who manages all communication with His Grace." Before Caroline could inquire further, the stable doors opened and a boy of about 12 rushed in. "Mr. Miller, Neptune's got loose again and is heading for the south paddock," Miller cursed under his breath. "Pardon, Miss Caroline, Neptune is our most valuable stallion and has a habit of testing boundaries." He turned to the boy. "Jamie, show Miss Caroline the office and the ledgers while I deal with this. She's our new record keeper." As Miller hurried out, Jamie eyed Caroline curiously. "You don't look like a stable hand," he observed with a child's blunt honesty. "And what should a stable hand look like?" she countered, raising an eyebrow. The boy shrugged. "Dunno. Not like you, though. You stand too straight." Caroline immediately tried to adjust her posture, Martha's warnings echoing in her mind. "The office," she prompted, changing the subject. Jamie led her to a small room off the main stable block. Unlike the rustic surroundings, this space was surprisingly well appointed, with a solid desk, several bookshelves filled with ledgers, and a large map of the estate on one wall. "Mr. Miller does all the important writing in here," Jamie explained. "Records of births, sales, purchases. The Duke wants to know everything about every horse, even though he never comes to see them anymore." "Never?" Caroline couldn't help her. "Curiosity," Jamie shook his head. "Not since the accident. That's what the older staff say anyway." "What accident?" The boy looked around furtively, then lowered his voice. 3 years ago, the Duchess was thrown from her horse during a hunt, broke her neck and died instantly. The Duke was there, saw the whole thing. They say he hasn't ridden since, barely leaves the north wing of the hall. Caroline felt a pang of sympathy for the unseen Duke. To witness such a tragedy would mark anyone deeply. "The children still ride, though," Jamie continued. "Lady Elizabeth and Master James. They come every day with their governess, Miss Winters." "The Duke has children?" "2. Lady Elizabeth is 8, Master James is 6. Their governess brings them for lessons with Mr. Miller 3 times a week." Their conversation was interrupted by Miller's return, leading a magnificent black stallion whose very bearing suggested nobility. Caroline's breath caught at the sight of him. Neptune was easily the finest horse she had ever seen. Already gossiping. "I see," Miller said, though his tone was not unkind. "Jamie, back to your duties. Miss Caroline, come meet our troublemaker." Caroline approached the stallion with natural confidence, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. Neptune watched her with intelligent eyes, ears flicking forward with interest. "He's magnificent," she breathed, unable to hide her admiration. "Aye, and he knows it too," Miller replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "Bred from his Grace's racing stock. Could have been a champion if the Duke hadn't lost interest in racing after. Caroline extended her hand, allowing Neptune to catch her scent. The stallion snuffled her palm, then nudged her shoulder, nearly causing her to stumble. "He likes you," Miller observed with surprise. "He's usually distrustful of strangers." "Animals can sense when they're respected," Caroline replied, smoothing her hand along Neptune's powerful neck. For the first time since arriving at Thornfield, she felt a glimmer of genuine pleasure. Whatever else had changed in her life, her connection with horses remained. The morning passed quickly as Miller showed Caroline the extensive breeding records and explained the system of documentation. The Duke of Thornfield's stables were renowned. Throughout England, it seemed, even if their owner had become a recluse. By midday, Caroline's head was swimming with information about bloodlines, training schedules, and the particular care required for racing stock. "You'll take your midday meal in the servants' hall," Miller informed her as the stable clock struck 12. "Mrs. Potter should have found a place for your friend by now as well." The servants' hall was located in the lower level of the main house, accessible through a side entrance that kept the staff separate from the family areas. Caroline followed Miller's directions, acutely aware of how different this was from dining in the elegant rooms of Rosewood Manor. The hall was already filled with staff when she arrived. Footmen in livery, housemaids in crisp uniforms, kitchen, staff still flushed from the heat of the cooking fires. All eyes turned to her as she entered, conversations temporarily halting. "You must be the new stable girl," a stern-looking older woman said, approaching Caroline. "I am Mrs. Potter, the housekeeper. Your friend Martha has been set to work in the laundry." "Thank you for finding a place for her," Caroline replied with genuine gratitude. Mrs. Potter studied her with narrowed eyes. "You have unusual manners for someone of your station." Caroline felt her heart rate quicken. "I was fortunate to receive some education, ma'am." Well, there's a place for you at the end of that table. The stable staff sits there." Caroline made her way to the indicated spot, feeling the curious gazes of the other servants. She recognized Jamie and nodded to him as she sat down. "Don't mind Mrs. Potter," a friendly voice said from beside her. Caroline turned to see a young woman, about her own age, dressed in the plain black of a lady's maid. "She's suspicious of everyone at first. I'm Anne, lady's maid to Lady Elizabeth." "Caroline," she replied simply, grateful for the friendly face. "So you're working with Mr. Miller? That's a good position. He's fair, if a bit gruff." Before Caroline could respond, the servants' hall door opened again, and a hush fell over the room. A man entered, tall, impeccably dressed in formal black, with silver at his temples and an air of absolute authority. "That's Mr. Winters, the Duke's butler," Anne whispered. "He rarely comes to the servants' hall." Mr. Winters surveyed the room, his gaze eventually landing on Caroline. "The new stable. Hand, I presume." Caroline stood, cursing herself when she nearly sank into the curtsy expected of a lady greeting a superior rather than the bob of a servant. "Yes, sir. Caroline, sir. His Grace wishes to be informed of all new staff personally," he stated, his voice cultured and precise. "You will present yourself at the library at 3 o'clock for his approval." A murmur of surprise rippled through the hall. Anne's eyes widened. "The Duke wants to see you personally. That's unusual." Caroline felt a flutter of anxiety. "Is that not standard procedure?" "Not for 3 years it hasn't been," Anne replied in a hushed tone. "The Duke sees almost no one except Lord Hargrove, Mr. Winters, and the children." After the meal, Caroline returned to the stables with a growing sense of unease. When she mentioned the summons to Miller, he appeared equally surprised. "Most peculiar," he muttered. "Perhaps because you'll be handling the correspondence regarding his prized bloodstock. In any case, you'd best make yourself as presentable as possible. Mr. Winters sets great store by appearances." At precisely 2:45, Caroline found herself being escorted through the magnificent main hall of Thornfield by Mr. Winters himself. Despite her reduced circumstances, she could not help but admire the grandeur around her, the soaring ceilings, priceless artworks, and gleaming marble floors that spoke of generations of wealth and power. "You will address His Grace as Your Grace initially, then Sir thereafter," Winters instructed as they walked. "Speak only when spoken to. Keep your answers brief and to the point. His Grace dislikes unnecessary chatter." "Yes, Mr. Winters," Caroline replied, mentally reviewing her story. She had been the daughter of a country parson, educated above her station, who had fallen on hard times after her father's death. It was close enough to the truth to be believable, while concealing her true identity. They stopped before an imposing oak door. Winters knocked sharply, then entered upon hearing a muffled response from within. The library of Thornfield Hall was a magnificent chamber, 2 stories high with a gallery running around the upper level. Thousands of leather-bound volumes lined the walls, their gilt titles catching the light from tall windows. But it was the man standing before the fireplace who immediately commanded Caroline's attention. The Duke of Thornfield was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his mid-30s, with the tall, powerful build of a man accustomed to physical activity. His features were strikingly handsome, if severe. A straight nose, strong jawline, and penetrating dark eyes currently fixed upon Caroline with unsettling intensity. A scar ran from his right temple down to his cheekbone, a pale line against his tanned skin. "Your Grace, may I present Caroline, the new assistant to Mr. Miller," Winters announced formally. Caroline cursed, careful to execute the movement as a servant would. Not the deep, elegant curtsy of a lady, but the quick, functional acknowledgement of a lower station. "Miss Caroline," the Duke said, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle, "you come with Lord Hargrove's recommendation, I understand." "Yes, Your Grace," she replied, keeping her eyes appropriately lowered. "Look at me, please." The request was unexpected. Caroline raised her gaze to meet his, fighting to maintain the demeanor of a servant rather than the direct gaze of an equal. The Duke studied her face with disconcerting thoroughness. "You have experience with horses?" "Yes, sir. I have worked with them most of my life. And your education. Hargrove mentioned you are literate and numerate. My father ensured I received schooling, sir. I can read, write, and keep accounts." Something flickered in the Duke's expression. "Your accent is refined for a stable hand." Caroline's heart stuttered. "My father was a parson, sir. He valued proper speech." The Duke continued to regard her with those penetrating eyes as though trying to see beyond her carefully constructed facade. Finally, he nodded slightly. "Very well. Mr. Miller speaks highly of your initial work. I expect excellence in the care of my horses, even if I no longer—" He paused, something dark passing over his features. "Well, that is of no consequence. You may go." Caroline cursed again and turned to leave, relief flooding through her at having apparently passed this unexpected test. "One moment," the Duke called. "There is one more matter." She turned back, tension returning. "Sir? My children's governess, Miss Winters, is leaving our employ at the end of the month. Her mother has fallen ill, requiring her return home." He glanced at a letter on his desk. "Lord Hargrove mentioned you are educated. Do you have any experience with children?" The question was so unexpected that Caroline momentarily forgot her role. "I have helped instruct younger children, but I have no formal experience as a governess, Your Grace." The Duke seemed to be considering something. "The children have grown attached to their daily rides. Having someone who could both continue their education and supervise their riding would be convenient." Caroline realized with a jolt that he was considering her for the position. "Sir, I'm not certain I would be qualified. I will be the judge of that," he interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Report to the schoolroom tomorrow morning at 10. Miss Winters will assess your suitability to take over her duties." With that, he turned away, clearly dismissing her. Winters ushered her out of the library, his expression inscrutable. "What just happened?" Caroline asked once they were in the corridor. "It appears His Grace is considering you for a significant promotion," Winters replied, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp with curiosity. "Most unusual indeed." That evening, Caroline related the extraordinary turn of events to Martha in the privacy of their cottage. "Governess to a duke's children?" Martha exclaimed. "That would certainly improve your position. Better quarters, better pay, more respect." "But far more scrutiny," Caroline pointed out. "As a stable hand, I can remain relatively anonymous. As governess, I would be interacting with the family directly. What if someone recognizes me? News of the Earl of Westmoreland's daughter working as a servant would cause exactly the kind of scandal Thomas was concerned about." Martha considered this. "Perhaps, but it also places you in a position to potentially improve your circumstances more quickly. The Duke clearly saw something in you that impressed him." Caroline wasn't so sure. There had been something almost unsettling about the intensity of the Duke's gaze, as though he were looking for something specific, or perhaps recognizing something he hadn't expected to find. The following morning, she reported to the schoolroom as instructed. Miss Winters, sister to the intimidating butler as Caroline had learned, was a thin, precise woman with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "His Grace informed me of his unusual proposal," she said after Caroline entered. "I must say, it is highly irregular to promote a stable hand to governess." "I agree, ma'am," Caroline replied honestly. "I'm not certain why His Grace suggested it. Nevertheless, we shall assess your suitability." Miss Winters gestured to a desk where papers were laid out. "Please complete these exercises while I observe. They will test your knowledge of subjects a governess should be proficient in." Caroline sat and examined the papers, arithmetic problems, passages for translation from French and Latin, historical questions, and literary analysis. Had she been playing the role of a parson's daughter, such tests might have been beyond her supposed education. But as the daughter of an earl who had received an expensive education from the finest tutors in England, they presented no challenge. She worked steadily, aware of Miss Winters's watchful gaze. When she finished and handed over the completed exercises, the governess's eyebrows rose progressively higher as she reviewed Caroline's work. "This is exceptional," she finally said, "far beyond what I would expect from someone of your background." Caroline realized her mistake too late. She had performed too well, revealing a level of education inconsistent with her claimed origins. "My father believed in education for women," she said quickly. "He taught me himself." "A most progressive parson," Miss Winters remarked dryly. "And your handwriting, it has the distinctive flourishes of one taught by a writing master, not a country clergyman." Before Caroline could formulate a response, the door opened and two children entered, a girl with dark curls and serious eyes, and a younger boy who was unmistakably the Duke's son, having inherited his father's striking features. "Miss Winters, is this our new governess?" the girl asked, studying Caroline with undisguised curiosity. "Lady Elizabeth, Master James, this is Caroline. His Grace is considering her for the position." The children approached Caroline with the direct manner of the young. Lady Elizabeth circled her once, then declared, "She doesn't look like a governess. She's too pretty." Caroline couldn't help but smile. "Thank you, I think." "Can you ride?" Master James asked eagerly. "Papa said our new governess must be able to ride with us." "I can indeed," Caroline assured him, on firmer ground with this line of questioning. "Show us," Lady Elizabeth demanded. "If you're to be our governess, we should see if you ride properly." Miss Winters sighed. "Their riding lesson is scheduled for this afternoon. Perhaps you could join us, and we shall continue our assessment." The children cheered at this suggestion, and Caroline found herself being swept along by their enthusiasm. Despite the complexity of her situation, there was something endearing about their eagerness. That afternoon, Caroline met the children at the stables, where Miller had prepared mounts for all of them, gentle ponies for the children and a spirited chestnut mare for Caroline. "Her name's Athena," Miller told her. "Bit too lively for most of the ladies who visit, but if you're half the horsewoman you claim to be, you should manage her fine." Caroline approached the mare confidently. As she had with Neptune, she took her time, allowing Athena to become accustomed to her presence before skillfully saddling her. The children watched with open admiration. "You do that better than the grooms," Lady Elizabeth observed. "I've had practice," Caroline replied simply, as she mounted with the ease of someone who had been riding since before she could walk. They set off at a sedate pace, Miss Winters on a placid gelding, watching Caroline's every move with the children. As they reached open parkland, Master James looked at Caroline with pleading eyes. "Can we gallop? Miss Winters never lets us gallop." "For good reason," Miss Winters interjected firmly. "It is unsafe for children your age without proper supervision." Caroline assessed the situation. The parkland ahead was smooth and clear of obstacles, and both children sat their ponies with surprising skill for their ages. "Perhaps a controlled canter," she suggested diplomatically. "If Miss Winters approves, and you promise to follow my instructions exactly." Miss Winters hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "A brief canter only, and you must stay between them." The children's faces lit up with excitement. Caroline positioned herself between them, gave clear instructions about maintaining control, and led them into a smooth canter across the open ground. The children handled their ponies admirably, and the joy on their faces as they experienced this new freedom was unmistakable. When they slowed back to a walk, both children were breathless with excitement. "That was splendid," Lady Elizabeth declared. "You must be our new governess, Caroline. You simply must." As they turned back toward the stables, Caroline noticed a figure watching from an upper window of Thornfield Hall, the unmistakable silhouette of the Duke, observing their ride. She wondered how he felt, watching his children enjoy an activity that had taken his wife from him. Upon their return to the stables, they found Lord Hargrove waiting, a distinguished gentleman in his 50s, with the polished manner of one accustomed to managing great estates. "His Grace wishes to see Miss Caroline immediately," he announced. "Miss Winters, please see to the children's afternoon lessons." Caroline dismounted, suddenly nervous. Had she overstepped by allowing the children to canter? Would the Duke be angry? Lord Hargrove led her not to the library this time, but to a smaller study on the first floor. The Duke stood at the window, still watching the stables where his children were dismounting. "Your Grace, Miss Caroline as requested," Lord Hargrove announced. The Duke turned, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Hargrove. That will be all." When they were alone, the Duke regarded Caroline with that same penetrating gaze that seemed to see through her disguise. "You ride exceptionally well," he said without preamble. "Far better than one would expect of a parson's daughter." Caroline's mouth went dry. "Thank you, sir. I had opportunities to learn from skilled riders." "Indeed." He circled his desk, picking up a letter. "I received an interesting communication this morning from your former employer, Lord Blackwood." Caroline froze, her heart pounding. Thomas had written to the Duke. Why? "He speaks highly of your character and abilities, but expresses concern about your suitability for a position of responsibility due to your emotional attachment to the family you previously served." Relief flooded through her. Thomas wasn't exposing her identity. He was attempting to undermine her chances at advancement. "I was devoted to my previous employers," she admitted carefully. "Their circumstances changed rather suddenly." The Duke studied her face. "Lord Blackwood suggests you might be best suited to remain in the stables, where your talents with horses can be utilized without the complications that might arise from closer contact with my family." Caroline felt a surge of indignation at Thomas's interference, but maintained her composure. "I serve at your Grace's pleasure. If you feel the stables are where I belong, I shall remain there gladly." Something like approval flickered in the Duke's eyes. "Diplomatically stated. However, I form my own judgments about my staff. Miss Winters informs me that your educational qualifications are exceptional, and I observed your skilled handling of my children this afternoon." He set down the letter. "The position of governess is yours, if you wish to accept it. Your duties would include the children's education in all standard subjects, supervision of their riding lessons, and general care during the day. You would have private quarters in the family wing, appropriate attire provided, and a salary 3 times what you would earn in the stables." Caroline was momentarily speechless. Despite Thomas's attempt to prevent it, she was being offered a position that would dramatically improve her situation. "The children seem quite taken with you already," the Duke continued, when she didn't immediately respond. "They have had little stability in their lives since their mother's death. A governess who can remain with them for an extended period would be valuable to their well-being." There was something in his tone, a father's concern poorly disguised, beneath ducal authority, that touched Caroline unexpectedly. "I would be honored to accept the position, Your Grace," she said finally. "Good." He nodded, businesslike once more. "You will begin officially once Miss Winters departs at the end of the month. In the meantime, you will divide your time between the stables and the schoolroom, learning the children's routines and requirements." As Caroline cursed and turned to leave, the Duke spoke again, his voice softer. "One more thing, Miss Caroline." She turned back. "Sir, thank you for giving my children a moment of joy today. It has been rare in this house." The simple gratitude in his words, so at odds with his usual authoritative manner, caught her off guard. For a brief moment she glimpsed not the forbidding Duke of Thornfield, but a grieving widower concerned for his children's happiness. "It was my pleasure, Your Grace," she replied with genuine warmth. "They are delightful children." As she left the study, Caroline felt an unexpected sense of purpose. What had begun as a humiliating descent into servitude was transforming into something different, a role where she might make a genuine difference in the lives of two children who had lost their mother. Of course, the closer she came to the Duke's family, the greater the risk of her true identity being discovered. But as she walked back to her cottage to share the news with Martha, Caroline realized she was willing to take that risk. For the first time since leaving Rosewood Manor, she felt she might have found a place where she was truly needed. What she couldn't know was that the Duke of Thornfield had secrets of his own, secrets that would soon collide with hers in ways neither of them could anticipate, forever altering the course of their carefully separated lives. If you enjoyed this chapter of our historical romance, be sure to subscribe to our channel for the dramatic conclusion. Will Caroline's true identity be discovered? What secrets does the mysterious Duke harbor? And will these two wounded souls find healing in each other? Subscribe now to receive notification when the final chapter is released, and join our community of romance enthusiasts for more captivating stories of love conquering all obstacles. The transition from stable hand to governess unfolded swiftly over the next 3 weeks. Each morning, Caroline divided her time between assisting Miller with the stable records and observing Miss Winter's lessons with the children. In the afternoons, she accompanied them on increasingly adventurous rides, building their confidence and skills in the saddle. The evenings were spent preparing for her new role, studying the children's lesson plans and familiarizing herself with the extensive library at Thornfield Hall. On her final day in the stables, Miller presented her with a small carved wooden horse. "A token of appreciation," he said gruffly. "You've organized our records better in 3 weeks than my previous assistants did in years." Caroline was touched by the unexpected gesture. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. I shall treasure it." "You have a gift with the horses," he continued, uncharacteristically talkative. "And with the children too, from what I hear. Perhaps this promotion is for the best, though we'll miss you here." The following morning, Caroline moved from the cottage she had shared with Martha to her new quarters in the family wing. A comfortable suite consisting of a bedroom, sitting room, and small private bathroom. The furnishings were elegant but understated, the windows overlooking the eastern gardens. It was a far cry from her humble cottage, though still modest compared to her previous chambers at Rosewood Manor. Mrs. Potter personally showed her the rooms. "His Grace insisted you be placed near the children's nursery," she explained, her earlier suspicion now replaced with a reluctant respect. These were the Duchess's morning rooms before her passing. Caroline's eyes widened at this information. "I couldn't possibly. His Grace was most specific," Mrs. Potter interrupted firmly. "He said the rooms have been empty too long and should serve a purpose again." After the housekeeper departed, Caroline ran her fingers over the delicate rosewood, writing desk positioned beneath the window. The Duchess's rooms. It was both an honor and somehow unsettling. What had the Duke's wife been like? Did these rooms still hold echoes of her presence? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Lady Elizabeth and Master James, both fairly bouncing with excitement. "Is it true?" Lady Elizabeth demanded without preamble. "Are you our new governess starting today?" Caroline smiled at their enthusiasm. "Indeed I am. Miss Winters left for her family home this morning." "Hurrah!" Master James exclaimed, clapping his small hands. "No more French verbs." "I'm afraid French verbs will still feature prominently in your education, Master James," Caroline replied, trying to sound stern but unable to hide her amusement. "But we'll ride every day," Lady Elizabeth pressed hopefully. "Weather permitting, yes, but studies must come first." The children exchanged glances that suggested they were already plotting ways to ensure their academic work was completed with record speed to maximize riding time. "Now I believe we should begin with a proper schedule," Caroline continued. "After breakfast, we shall meet in the schoolroom for morning lessons. Mathematics and Latin for Master James, literature and history for Lady Elizabeth. Then we shall Switch. After luncheon, weather permitting, we'll have our riding lesson. What about drawing? Lady Elizabeth asked. Miss Winters said I have talent. And music? Added Master James. Papa says I must practice piano daily, though I detest it. Caroline nodded. We shall make time for all necessary subjects. Now run along and prepare for breakfast. I shall join you shortly. As the children scampered away, Caroline caught sight of Mr. Winters watching from the end of the corridor. The butler approached with measured steps. Miss Caroline, he greeted, her with a slight bow. I trust your quarters are satisfactory. More than satisfactory, Mr. Winters. Please convey my gratitude to His Grace. Indeed. The butler hesitated, then added, His Grace requests your presence in the library after breakfast, alone. Caroline's pulse quickened. Did he specify the reason? His Grace rarely explains his requests, Winters replied with the faintest hint of a smile. But I believe he wishes to discuss the children's education personally. After a hasty breakfast, with the children in the nursery, Caroline made her way to the library, mentally reviewing the educational plans she had developed. She had spent hours crafting a comprehensive approach that balanced academic subjects with physical activities and artistic pursuits, tailored to each child's strengths. The Duke was standing at one of the tall windows when she entered, sunlight silhouetting his powerful frame. He turned at the sound of her curtsy. Miss Caroline, he acknowledged with a slight nod. I trust you are settling into your new position? Yes, Your Grace. The quarters are most comfortable. And the children seem pleased with the arrangement. They are more than pleased, he replied, moving to his desk. They speak of little else but their new governess, who allows them to gallop and teaches them about horse breeding. Caroline couldn't tell if this was approval or criticism. I believe a well-rounded education includes practical knowledge as well as academic subjects, sir. Indeed. He gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite his desk, a significant courtesy that had not been extended during their previous meetings. I wish to speak with you about my expectations for their education. The Duke outlined his requirements with precision: Latin, Greek, mathematics and sciences for both children, with additional focus on estate management for his son and appropriate feminine accomplishments for his daughter. Standard aristocratic education, but with surprising emphasis on practical knowledge. The world is changing, he explained, when Caroline noted this approach. James will inherit responsibilities that require more than classical languages and dancing. Elizabeth must be prepared for more than simply making an advantageous marriage. Progressive views, Your Grace, Caroline observed before she could stop herself. His dark eyes assessed her. Perhaps. My late wife held similar opinions on education. She was unconventional in many ways. This was the first time he had mentioned his wife directly to Caroline. She treaded carefully. The children speak of her often, though they were quite young when she passed. Something flickered across his face, pain quickly masked. They remember her through stories from the staff, more than through their own memories. Elizabeth was 5, James only 3. He paused, then added quietly, It is important they know who she was. Alexandra would not have wanted to be forgotten, or transformed into some saintly perfect figure beyond human recognition. What would you like them to know of her? Caroline asked gently. The Duke seemed surprised by the question. After a moment's consideration, he replied that she was brave to the point of recklessness, that she loved adventure and challenged all conventions, that she had a temper to match her compassion. His voice softened, that she would have moved heaven and earth for them. Caroline was touched by this raw glimpse of the man behind the ducal facade. I shall ensure they know these things, sir. Thank you. He cleared his throat, reverting to his more formal manner. There is one more matter. The children's maternal grandmother, the Countess of Harewood, has invited them to spend Christmas at her estate. I've declined her invitations since Alexandra's death, but they are old enough now, and they should know their mother's family." "A wonderful opportunity for them," Caroline agreed. "You would accompany them, of course," he continued. "It is a 3-week visit, beginning mid-December." Caroline felt a flutter of anxiety. The Countess of Harewood moved in the highest social circles, circles that had once included Caroline's own family. The risk of being recognized was significant. "Is something wrong?" the Duke asked, noting her hesitation. "No, sir. I have never been in such elevated company. I would not wish to embarrass you or the children through some social misstep." The Duke's expression softened marginally. "Your manners are impeccable, Miss Caroline. Suspiciously. So, in fact, for a parson's daughter." Before she could respond to this observation, he continued, "You will act as their governess, not as a social companion. Your interactions with the Countess and her guests will be limited." "Of course, Your Grace." Caroline hoped her relief wasn't too evident. "Well then, I believe that concludes our discussion. The children await their first official lesson with you, I imagine." Caroline rose and curtsied. As she turned to leave, the Duke spoke again. "Miss Caroline." "Yes, Your Grace? I have not seen my children so animated in years. Whatever your background truly is, you have brought something valuable to this household. I am grateful." The unexpected acknowledgement left Caroline momentarily speechless. She managed a simple "thank you, sir," before departing, her mind whirling with the implications of his words. Did he suspect her disguise? And if so, why had he not confronted her directly? The weeks that followed established a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were devoted to lessons, with Caroline finding that both children were bright and eager to learn when properly engaged. Lady Elizabeth showed particular aptitude for languages and literature, while Master James displayed a natural talent for mathematics and science. Afternoons were spent either riding or, when the weather turned inclement with the approach of winter, exploring the vast halls of Thornfield or engaging in indoor activities like drawing and music. Caroline discovered that Master James's distaste for piano lessened considerably when lessons incorporated elements of mathematical pattern and theory. Her interactions with the Duke remained limited but significant. Once a week, he requested a formal report on the children's progress. These meetings, initially brief and businesslike, gradually extended as he showed increasing interest in their educational development. Occasionally, he would join them for their evening meal in the nursery, his reserve softening as he listened to his children's excited accounts of their day's activities. One evening in late November, as the first snow fell outside the great windows of Thornfield Hall, Caroline sat in her sitting room, reviewing the day's lessons and planning for the next. A knock at her door revealed Martha, now comfortably established as an upper housemaid, thanks to Caroline's quiet influence. "You're looking well, my lady," Martha said softly, after ensuring they were alone. "This position suits you." "Martha, you must not call me that," Caroline cautioned, though she smiled at her old friend. "The walls have ears in great houses." "Forgive me. Old habits." Martha settled in the chair opposite Caroline's. "The staff speaks highly of you. Even Mrs. Potter admits you have unusual quality for someone of your supposed background." "That is precisely what concerns me," Caroline sighed. "I fear I have not been convincing enough in my role. The Duke himself has made comments suggesting he finds my manners too refined. Yet he continues to increase your responsibilities and favor," Martha pointed out. "Just yesterday, I overheard Mr. Winters telling Lord Hargrove that His Grace has instructed the children's wardrobe be updated for your visit to the Countess." Caroline bit her lip. "That visit still worries me. The Countess of Harewood attended several of my father's larger gatherings at Rosewood. There is every chance she might recognize me." "It has been over a year," Martha reasoned. "Your appearance has changed considerably. The elegant Lady Caroline Huntington, with her fashionable gowns and elaborate coiffure, bears little resemblance to the plainly dressed governess you are now." Before Caroline could respond, another knock sounded. This time, it was Mr. Winters. "Forgive the intrusion, Miss Caroline," he said formally. "His Grace requests your immediate presence in the library. There appears to be an urgent matter regarding the children's Christmas visit." Caroline exchanged a worried glance with Martha before following the butler. Had something gone wrong? Perhaps the visit had been cancelled, which would be a relief in terms of preserving her disguise, though disappointing. For the children, the library was dimly lit, only a few lamps and the fireplace illuminating the vast space. The Duke stood with his back to the door, examining something on his desk. "You wish to see me, Your Grace?" Caroline asked after Winters had departed. The Duke turned slowly, and Caroline was startled to see he held a newspaper in his hands. "Yes, Miss Caroline, or should I say, Lady Caroline Huntington." The world seemed to stop. Caroline felt the blood drain from her face as she stared at the paper in his hands. It was folded open to the society pages, where a small item caught her eye. "Lord Blackwood, the new Earl of Westmoreland, announces the search for his missing cousin, Lady Caroline Huntington, who disappeared from her family home several months ago. A substantial reward is offered for information leading to her safe return." "Your Grace, I can explain," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please do," he interrupted, his tone dangerously calm. "Explain why the daughter of one of England's oldest earldoms is posing as a governess in my household, using false credentials and a fabricated past." Caroline drew a deep breath, summoning her courage. "I did not disappear, Your Grace. I was effectively displaced when my cousin Thomas inherited my father's title and estates. The entailment meant everything passed to him as the nearest male relation. I was left with nothing but a dilapidated cottage and no means of support." The Duke's expression remained impassive. "And so you chose to enter service rather than seek assistance from other family connections or friends? My father's gambling debts and final illness had isolated us from society," Caroline explained, the painful truth spilling forth after months of concealment. "Those who might have helped once turned away when our circumstances declined. Thomas arranged the position in your stables as a kindness of sorts, though he insisted I conceal my identity to avoid scandal. And now he publicly searches for you offering rewards?" The Duke's voice held skepticism. "That suggests a different narrative." Caroline's eyes flashed with sudden anger. "Because he has likely realized that having me missing rather than known to be in service preserves the family dignity better. Or perhaps he fears I might eventually find means to contest the inheritance, though I have no such plans or resources." The Duke studied her with those penetrating dark eyes. "Why did you accept the governess position? Surely you realized it. Increased the risk of discovery. For the children," she answered honestly. "They reminded me of—" She stopped, unwilling to reveal too much of her heart. "They deserved better than a succession of disinterested governesses, and yes, the position offered greater comfort and dignity than the stables. Is that so difficult to understand?" Something shifted in the Duke's expression, a softening, perhaps, or simple recognition of a truth he could not dispute. "No," he finally said, "it is not difficult to understand the desire to maintain one's dignity in reduced circumstances. What is more difficult to comprehend is why you continued the deception after I offered you a position of trust with my children." The subtle emphasis on trust struck Caroline like a physical blow. "I feared you would dismiss me if you knew the truth, that I would lose not only my position but my connection to the children." "You have grown attached to them," he observed, not a question, but a statement. "Yes," Caroline admitted softly, "they are remarkable children, Your Grace. Intelligent, spirited, kind-hearted. How could I not become attached? The Duke set down the newspaper and moved around his desk, closing some of the distance between them. And they are equally attached to you. Elizabeth informed me quite seriously yesterday that she wishes you to remain their governess forever, while James declared you are the best thing that has happened since Neptune was born. Despite the gravity of the situation, Caroline couldn't suppress a small smile. High praise indeed, considering his devotion to that horse. Indeed. The Duke's own lips twitched briefly before his expression grew serious again. Which places me in a difficult position, Lady Caroline. I cannot, in good conscience, continue to employ someone who has deliberately deceived me. Yet I am reluctant to disrupt my children's lives again, so soon after they have found stability and happiness in your care. Hope flared briefly in Caroline's chest. Then, perhaps, furthermore, he continued as if she hadn't spoken, there is the matter of Lord Blackwood's announcement. If he is genuinely searching for you out of concern, I would be remiss in concealing your whereabouts. He's not concerned for my welfare, Caroline stated firmly, only for the family reputation. If my true circumstances became known, that the daughter of an earl was working as a servant, it would reflect poorly on him. The Duke regarded her thoughtfully. You seem very certain of his motivations. I am. Thomas never wanted me at Rosewood. My presence was a reminder that the estate should have been mine had I been born male. He would prefer I simply disappear permanently, but propriety demands he make some show of concern. A long silence followed as the Duke considered her words. Caroline stood straight-backed and proud, despite her inner turmoil. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the dignity befitting her birth, even if she no longer had the title or wealth to accompany it. There may be a solution, the Duke finally said, his tone measured. One that preserves your position. Here, while addressing Lord Blackwood's public concerns, Caroline looked at him questioningly. What solution, Your Grace? I shall write to Lord Blackwood personally, informing him that you are here at Thornfield Hall as an honoured guest and companion to my children, not as a governess or servant, but as a relation of an old family friend who has fallen on difficult times. But that would mean, it would mean adjusting your position here, he confirmed. Officially, you would be known as Lady Caroline. Distant connection to the family, assisting with the children's education and care as a favour to me rather than as an employed governess. Caroline was stunned by the suggestion. Why would you do this, Your Grace? It would be far simpler to dismiss me and hire another governess. The Duke turned away, moving to stand before the fire. For a long moment he stared into the flames, before answering, because my children are happy. Because for the first time in 3 years there is laughter in this house. Because you have accomplished in weeks what a succession of highly recommended governesses failed to do in years. You have made Thornfield feel like a home again, rather than a mausoleum. His candour left Caroline speechless. When he turned back to face her, his expression held a vulnerability she had never seen before. Alexandra would have liked you, he said quietly. She valued authenticity over social convention, courage over comfortable compliance. Despite your deception about your identity, you have shown both qualities in how you've cared for our children. Our children, Caroline echoed softly. You speak of them as still shared with her. They will always be our children, he replied simply. Death does not change that. The rawness of his grief, still evident after 3 years, touched something deep within Caroline. Without thinking, she moved closer, placing a gentle hand on his arm. No, it does not, and they will always need both the memory of who she was and the reality of who you are. He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then met her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a suspended moment, Something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of shared loss and unexpected connection. The Duke stepped back first, breaking the spell. "So, Lady Caroline, do you accept this arrangement? To remain at Thornfield not as a governess, but as a guest who contributes to the children's upbringing?" "I would be honoured," she replied sincerely, "but there is the matter of my cousin. He may not accept your explanation so readily." "Leave Lord Blackwood." "To me," the Duke said with quiet authority, "I believe he will find it difficult to argue with a duke, particularly one offering a generous financial settlement to secure your comfortable future here." Caroline's eyes widened. "Financial settlement? But that's unnecessary." "It is entirely necessary," he interrupted firmly. "You are the daughter of an earl, reduced to service through no fault of your own. Your cousin has moral, if not legal, obligations to ensure your welfare. I merely intend to remind him of this fact." The next morning, Caroline breakfasted with the children as usual, though her mind was still reeling from the previous night's revelations and the Duke's unexpected solution. She had lain awake for hours, alternating between relief at not being dismissed and anxiety about the dramatic change in her position at Thornfield. "Caroline, you're not listening," Lady Elizabeth complained, pulling her back to the present. "I asked if we could practice decorating for Christmas today. The servants are bringing down the ornaments from the attics." "Forgive me, I was distracted," Caroline admitted. "Yes, we can certainly help with the decorations after your morning lessons." Master James looked up from his porridge with sudden concern. "You look tired. Are you ill? You won't leave like Miss Winters, will you?" The worry in his young face touched Caroline deeply. "No, James, I'm not leaving. In fact—" She hesitated, unsure how to explain her change in status. "In fact, Caroline will be staying with us in a somewhat different capacity," came the Duke's voice from the doorway. The children jumped up in surprise and delight at their father's unexpected appearance at breakfast. "Papa!" Lady Elizabeth exclaimed. "Are you joining us?" "Indeed I am." He took a seat at the table, nodding for the children to resume their places. "I have an announcement that concerns all of us." The children looked at him with eager curiosity, while Caroline tried to maintain her composure. "I have recently discovered that Caroline, or rather Lady Caroline, is distantly connected to our family through your mother's side," the Duke explained smoothly. "She is, in fact, the daughter of the Earl of Westmoreland, who was an old friend of your grandfather's." Lady Elizabeth's eyes grew round. "Lady Caroline, you're a lady like me?" "Yes, Elizabeth," Caroline confirmed gently, "though circumstances required me to seek employment after my father's passing." "Why didn't you tell us?" Master James demanded, looking somewhat betrayed. Caroline exchanged a glance with the Duke before answering carefully. "Sometimes, James, adults must make difficult choices. I needed to make my own way in the world, and I didn't wish to be treated differently because of my title. From now on," the Duke continued, "Lady Caroline will remain with us not as your governess, but as a family friend who will continue to oversee your education and activities. Her quarters will remain the same, but her position in our household will change accordingly." "Does this mean we must call you Lady Caroline now?" Master James asked, his brow furrowed. Caroline smiled at his concern. "You may continue to call me Caroline in private, if you wish. But yes, in formal settings, the proper address would be Lady Caroline." "I think it's splendid," Lady Elizabeth declared, ever the romantic. "It's like a story where the princess is disguised as a commoner and then restored to her rightful place." "Not quite a princess," Caroline corrected with a laugh, "and certainly not restored to any rightful place. But I am grateful for your father's generosity in allowing me to stay with you." The Duke watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. "Children, finish your breakfast quickly. Lady Caroline and I have matters to discuss before your lessons begin." Once the children had been ushered out by their nurse, the Duke turned to Caroline. "I've drafted a letter to Lord Blackwood. I would like you to review it before I send it." He handed her the letter, written in his bold, decisive hand. As Caroline read, her eyes widened at the authoritative tone and the clear implication that any attempt to remove her from Thornfield would be met with aristocratic displeasure of the highest order. More surprising was the mentioned settlement, a substantial annual allowance to be paid to Caroline, drawn from her father's estate but administered through the Duke's solicitors. "Your Grace, this is extremely generous, but I cannot accept such financial provision," she protested. "My remaining at Thornfield is more than enough." "It is not charity, Lady Caroline," he replied firmly. "It is justice. Your cousin has moral obligations to you as his predecessor's daughter. This ensures he fulfills them without requiring you to return to his household or marry according to his wishes." The reference to marriage caught Caroline by surprise. "Has Thomas suggested matrimonial arrangements for me?" "Not explicitly, but it is the standard solution for impoverished female relations, is it not? A hasty marriage to some willing gentleman in need of connections or funds." His tone held a bitterness that suggested personal knowledge of such arrangements. "I would never consent to such a match," Caroline stated with quiet determination. "No, I don't imagine you would." For the first time that morning, a hint of a smile touched his lips. "Your independence of spirit has been evident from the moment you allowed my children to gallop against Miss Winters's express instructions." Caroline felt her cheeks warm. "They were perfectly safe. I would never endanger them." "I know." The simple statement carried unexpected weight. "Which is why I trust you with them, despite your initial deception." The preparations for the Christmas. A visit to the Countess of Harewood proceeded with renewed energy, following the clarification of Caroline's status. News spread quickly through the household, with reactions ranging from Mrs. Potter's stunned disbelief to Martha's quiet satisfaction. The staff adapted with remarkable speed to addressing her as "my lady" instead of "miss," though Caroline insisted they need not stand on ceremony when the children were not present. A week before their departure, a package arrived from London. 3 new gowns for Caroline commissioned by the Duke himself. They were elegantly fashionable without being ostentatious, suitable for a lady of good birth in somewhat reduced circumstances. "His Grace instructed that you be properly attired for the Countess's house party," Winters explained as he presented the package. "These arrived from his London modiste this morning." Caroline was touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. Though she had brought a few of her simpler gowns from Rosewood, none were suitable for the formal gatherings that would occur at the Countess's estate. The morning of their departure dawned clear and cold, the winter sun glinting off fresh snow that blanketed the grounds of Thornfield. The children could barely contain their excitement as they bundled into the Duke's finest carriage, their breath forming small clouds in the frosty air. To Caroline's surprise, the Duke himself appeared. Just as they were preparing to depart, "Papa!" Master James called out. "Are you coming with us after all?" The Duke shook his head. "No, James. Estate business requires my presence here. But I wanted to see you off properly." He straightened his son's cap and brushed a smudge from Lady Elizabeth's cheek with unexpected tenderness. Then he turned to Caroline, who stood slightly apart to give him a moment with his children. "Lady Caroline, a word before you depart." They moved a few steps away from the carriage. "The Countess can be formidable," he warned in a low voice. "She has not forgiven me for declining her invitations these past years. She may take out her displeasure on you as my representative. I understand, Your Grace. I shall endeavour to smooth relations as best I can." He hesitated, then added, "Alexandra's death was difficult for her mother. She may ask questions about..." The children, about their life at Thornfield, about... He trailed off, seemingly unable to complete the thought. About you, Caroline supplied gently. He nodded once, his jaw tight. Be discreet, but honest. The children deserve a relationship with their grandmother despite the complexities between us. Of course, Your Grace. As she turned to join the children in the carriage, he spoke again, his voice so low she almost didn't catch the words. I shall miss them. And you, Lady Caroline. Before she could respond, he stepped back, his ducal mask firmly in place once more. Safe journey. I expect regular reports on their progress. The journey to the Countess's estate took 2 days, with an overnight stay at a comfortable inn. The children's excitement never waned, their conversation filled with questions about their maternal grandmother and the Christmas festivities they might expect. Will there be other children to play with? Lady Elizabeth asked as their carriage finally approached the impressive gates of Harewood Hall. I believe several families with children have been invited, Caroline replied, smoothing her travel dress and checking that the children looked presentable for their arrival. Your grandmother's letter mentioned cousins from your mother's side of the family. The Countess of Harewood was waiting on the grand steps as their carriage pulled up, a tall, imposing woman whose regal bearing reminded Caroline forcibly of her own grandmother. Despite the silver threading through her dark hair, the Countess's resemblance to her late daughter was striking. The same high cheekbones and proud posture that Lady Elizabeth was already beginning to display. "Grandmother," the children called, in unison as they tumbled from the carriage. The Countess's austere expression melted as she embraced her grandchildren, holding them tightly as though afraid they might disappear. When she finally released them, her eyes were suspiciously bright. "Elizabeth, you are the very image of your mother at your age," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And James, you have grown so tall. How long it has been since I've seen you." Caroline remained by the carriage, allowing this family reunion to unfold without intrusion. Eventually, the Countess looked up, seeming to notice her for the first time. "And you must be Lady Caroline Huntington," she said, her tone cooling noticeably. "My son-in-law's guest." Caroline cursed deeply, as befitted the daughter of an earl greeting a countess. "Yes, your ladyship. Thank you for including me in your kind invitation." The Countess studied her with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "The daughter of Westmoreland, I understand. I knew your father slightly. A charming man, if somewhat reckless with his fortune." The casual reference to her father's failings was clearly deliberate, a reminder that despite Caroline's title, her family's reduced circumstances placed her in an ambiguous social position. Caroline accepted the barb with outward grace. "My father had many fine qualities as well as flaws, your ladyship, as do we all." Something like reluctant approval flickered in the Countess's eyes at this poised response. "Indeed. Well, come inside, all of you. The journey must have been tiring, and the children should rest before dinner." The grandeur of Harewood Hall rivaled Thornfield, though in a more ostentatious style. Where Thornfield exuded somber dignity and historical weight, Harewood gleamed with obvious wealth and modern luxury. Footmen in elaborate livery lined the entrance hall, and crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead as they were led to their rooms. The children were installed in a nursery suite that had clearly been prepared with loving care. Toys, both new and preserved from their mother's childhood, awaited them, along with books, games, and a small Christmas tree decorated with ribbon and candles. Caroline's own chamber was adjacent to the nursery, smaller than her rooms at Thornfield, but elegantly appointed, with views of the snow-covered formal gardens. As she unpacked with Martha's assistance, the Countess having raised no objection to her accompanying them, Caroline felt the first stirrings of genuine anxiety about the coming weeks. "The Countess remembers my father," she murmured to Martha. as the older woman hung her new gowns. "She may well remember me from society events before my father's decline." "It's been years, my lady," Martha reminded her, "and you were just one of many young ladies at those gatherings. Besides, who would expect the Earl of Westmoreland's daughter to be caring for another family's children?" "I suppose you're right," Caroline sighed. "Still, I must be careful." The Christmas house party proved to be even larger than Caroline had anticipated. Over the next few days, a stream of guests arrived. Aristocratic families with connections to the Countess, many with children near in age to Elizabeth and James. The nursery became a hive of activity, filled with laughter and occasional squabbles as the young cousins became reacquainted. Caroline found herself in an unusual position, neither fully a guest nor a servant, but occupying an ambiguous middle ground as the children's companion. Some of the Countess's visitors treated her with the respect due her birth, while others clearly viewed her reduced circumstances with poorly disguised disdain. "Is it true you were working as a governess at Thornfield?" one particularly tactless young matron asked during afternoon tea on their third day. "How very novel." "I was assisting with the children's education." "Yes," Caroline replied evenly. "A rewarding occupation for anyone who values the development of young minds." The Countess, who overheard this exchange, gave Caroline an appraising look. Later that evening, after the children had been put to bed, a footman delivered a message, requesting Caroline's presence in the Countess's private sitting room. "Lady Caroline," the Countess greeted her, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "Please sit. I wish to speak with you about my grandchildren." Caroline took the offered seat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. "They are wonderful children. Your ladyship, you must be very proud of them." "I barely know them," the Countess replied with sudden, surprising candour. "My son-in-law has kept them isolated at Thornfield since Alexandra's death. This is the first time he has permitted them to visit me in 3 years." The pain in her voice was unmistakable. Caroline responded carefully. "I believe His Grace felt they were too young to travel, and perhaps too vulnerable after losing their mother." "He was punishing me," the Countess stated flatly, "for suggesting that Alexandra's death was not entirely accidental." Caroline couldn't hide her shock. "Not accidental, but I understood the Duchess was thrown from her horse during a hunt." "She was." The Countess leaned forward, her eyes intense. "But Alexandra was an exceptional horsewoman who had ridden since childhood. The idea that she would lose control of a horse she knew well stretches credibility. Accidents happen even to the most skilled riders," Caroline said gently. "A sudden noise, an unexpected obstacle. My daughter wrote to me the week before." "Her death," the Countess interrupted. "She mentioned arguments with Edward, with the Duke. She said he was becoming increasingly controlling, worried about her reckless behavior, setting a poor example for the children." Caroline frowned. This portrait of the Duke was at odds with the man she had come to know, stern at times certainly, but deeply concerned for his children's welfare and growth. "What exactly are you suggesting, your ladyship?" The Countess seemed to deflate slightly. "I don't know. Perhaps nothing. Grief makes us search for explanations, for someone to blame. Edward loved Alexandra in his way, but they were ill-matched. She wild and free-spirited, he bound by duty and tradition. Yet they had children together," Caroline observed. "Children who carry aspects of both their parents' natures." "Yes," the Countess agreed, her expression softening. "Elizabeth has Alexandra's spirit, while James shows Edward's thoughtfulness. They complement each other, as their parents never quite managed to do." They sat in silence for a moment before the Countess spoke again. "Why did you accept this position, Lady Caroline? The daughter of an earl, caring for another man's children. There must have been other options available to you." Caroline considered her answer carefully. "After my father's death, Those options were more limited than you might imagine, but in truth, I remained at Thornfield because of the children. They needed continuity, stability, someone who would see them as individuals, not merely as the Duke's heirs. "And what of the Duke himself?" the Countess asked shrewdly. "Has he remained as isolated, as withdrawn as reported? The Edward I knew before Alexandra's death was serious but engaged with the world. The man who refused my invitations for 3 years seemed determined to shut out all life and joy. He is changing," Caroline replied thoughtfully. "For the children's sake, I believe he is trying to emerge from his grief. Allowing them to visit you is one sign of that change." The Countess studied her with penetrating eyes so similar to her granddaughter's. "You speak of him with understanding, even compassion. Most unusual in an employee, even one of noble birth." "I am no longer precisely an employee," Caroline reminded her. "His Grace has been most generous in adjusting my position to reflect my background." "Indeed." The Countess's tone suggested she found this arrangement curious. "Well, Lady Caroline, I appreciate your candor. Whatever the circumstances that brought you to Thornfield, my grandchildren clearly benefit from your presence. For that, you have my gratitude." The remainder of their stay passed in a whirl of Christmas festivities, the Countess having, apparently, decided to accept Caroline's role in her grandchildren's lives, included her in family gatherings, and even presented her with a thoughtful gift on Christmas morning, a delicate silver locket containing miniature portraits of the Duchess, with Elizabeth and James as infants. "Alexandra would have wanted her children to be cared for by someone who genuinely loves them," she said simply, as Caroline thanked her for the unexpected present. "I believe you do." "I do," Caroline admitted softly. "They are remarkable children." Countess nodded, a hint of moisture in her eyes. "Yes, they are, much like their mother." After a pause, she added, "You will tell Edward, the Duke, that he's welcome to visit with them next time. This estrangement has gone on long enough." "I will convey your message, your ladyship." As their visit drew to a close, Caroline found herself unexpectedly reluctant to leave. Despite the initial tension, the children had flourished in their grandmother's company, learning stories about their mother and connecting with extended family they barely knew existed. The Countess, too, seemed transformed by their presence, her austere manner giving way to genuine warmth and occasional flashes of the same spirited humor that characterized Lady Elizabeth. On their final evening, after the children had been put to bed, Caroline sat in her room, writing a detailed account of their visit for the Duke. As she described the children's activities and the Countess's affection for them, she found herself adding a personal observation. "The reconciliation between your Grace's family and the Countess would, I believe, bring great joy to Lady Elizabeth and Master James. They have flourished here, learning about their mother through those who knew and loved her best. While Thornfield is their home and their sanctuary, Harewood offers them connection to a part of their heritage that only the Countess and her family can provide." She hesitated, pen poised over the paper, then added, "If I may be so bold, Your Grace, healing sometimes requires building bridges rather than maintaining walls, for the children's sake, and perhaps for your own as well." The journey back to Thornfield was subdued compared to their outward trip, the children quiet with the combined effects of holiday excitement and the sadness of leaving their grandmother. As the familiar silhouette of Thornfield Hall appeared on the horizon, however, their spirits lifted. "Do you think Papa missed us?" Master James asked, pressing his face to the carriage window. "I'm certain he did," Caroline assured him, surprised to realize she had missed the Duke as well, his intense gaze, his unexpected moments of vulnerability, the quiet strength he maintained for his children's sake. The Duke was waiting on the steps as their carriage pulled up, abandoning ducal dignity as his children tumbled out and ran to him. He knelt to embrace them both, his face lighting with a genuine smile that transformed his usually somber features. Over the children's heads, his eyes met Caroline's. Something passed between them. Relief, recognition, perhaps something deeper, that neither was ready to name. "Welcome home, Lady Caroline," he said, as she approached and curtsied. "Thank you, Your Grace. It's good to be back." That evening, after the children had been settled in their rooms, excitedly recounting their adventures to their nurse, the Duke requested Caroline's presence in the library. He had read her letters, he explained, and wished for a more detailed account of their visit. Caroline described the Countess's initial coolness giving way to genuine affection, the children's delight in meeting cousins and learning family stories, and the Christmas celebrations that had filled Harewood with music and laughter. "And the Countess herself?" the Duke asked, his expression guarded. "Did she question the children about their life here?" "She asked them about their happiness, their activities, their education," Caroline replied carefully. "Nothing inappropriate or intrusive," the Duke nodded slowly. "And did she speak to you about Alexandra, about the circumstances of her death?" Caroline hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal of her private conversation with the Countess. The Duke noticed her hesitation immediately. "She still believes I was somehow responsible," he stated flatly. "That Alexandra's death was not simply a tragic accident. She is a mother who lost her daughter," Caroline said gently. "Grief sometimes seeks explanations where none exist." "There is an explanation," the Duke replied, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "My wife was headstrong and reckless. I asked her not to jump a particular hedge that day. It had been raining, the ground was treacherous. She laughed and said I worried too much. Then she—" His voice broke. "She rode straight at it, looking back at me with that challenging smile of hers. The horse stumbled on landing. She was thrown. I reached her just in time to hold her as she took her last breath." The raw pain in his voice tore at Caroline's heart. Without thinking, she moved to his side, taking his hand in hers. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "How terrible for you to witness such a tragedy." "The Countess is right about one thing," he continued, his fingers tightening around Caroline's. "I did argue with Alexandra in the days before her death, not about the children, but about her constant risk-taking. I feared exactly what happened. And then it did, and all my fears, all my cautions meant nothing in the end. So you withdrew," Caroline said softly. "From society, from Alexandra's family, perhaps even from the children to some extent. You built walls to protect yourself from further loss." He looked at her with surprise, as though unaccustomed to being so thoroughly understood. "Yes, it seemed the only way to survive. But the children need more than survival." Caroline finished for him. "They need joy, connection, the freedom to take their own risks and grow into themselves." "As you've shown them," he acknowledged. "Since your arrival, they have transformed." Elizabeth laughs again. James speaks of the future with excitement rather than apprehension. Caroline felt a flush of pleasure at his words. "They are remarkable children. They needed only the opportunity to show it, and a remarkable woman to guide them." His dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "A woman who entered my household under false pretenses, yet has proven herself more honest in her care for my children than many who presented perfect credentials." "Your Grace," she began, but he shook his head. "Edward," he corrected quietly. "When we are alone, I would have you call me Edward." The intimacy of the request sent a tremor through her. "Edward," she repeated, the name feeling both strange and right on her lips. Slowly, deliberately, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Thank you, Caroline, for bringing my children back to me, and perhaps for beginning to bring me back to life as well." In that moment, with the firelight casting golden shadows across his face and his hand warm around hers, Caroline realized a truth she had been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with the Duke of Thornfield, not for his title or his wealth, but for the man beneath the ducal facade, the devoted father, the grieving widower finding his way back to joy, the man who had offered her dignity when she had lost everything. As though reading her thoughts, Edward released her hand reluctantly. "It is late. You must be tired from your journey." "Yes," she agreed, though fatigue was far from what she felt in that moment. "Good night, Edward." "Good night, Caroline." As she left the library, Caroline knew that something fundamental had shifted between them. What had begun as a deception, continued as duty, had transformed into something neither of them had sought, but both perhaps desperately needed: the possibility of a new beginning, a second chance at happiness, an opportunity to heal old wounds through unexpected love. The days that followed their return from Harewood took on a new rhythm. Caroline continued overseeing the children's education, but now joined the Duke, Edward, for dinner most evenings. Their conversations ranged from the children's progress to literature, politics, and estate management. To her surprise, Edward valued her opinions and occasionally implemented her suggestions regarding Thornfield's operations. The children, far from being confused by her change in status, seemed to delight in it. Lady Elizabeth took particular pleasure in introducing Caroline as Our Lady Caroline to visitors, while Master James gravely informed the vicar's wife that Caroline was practically family now. Spring arrived, bringing new life to Thornfield's gardens and a corresponding lightening of spirits throughout the household. Edward emerged from his seclusion, accompanying the children and Caroline on rides across the estate, attending local functions, and even hosting a small gathering to celebrate Lady Elizabeth's 9th birthday. It was during this celebration that Lord Hargrove observed to Caroline, "His Grace is a changed man these past months. The staff credits your influence." My lady, Caroline demurred, but secretly treasured the observation. She had indeed seen Edward transform, the shadows in his eyes receding, genuine smiles appearing with increasing frequency, his natural authority softened by returning warmth. One evening in late April, as they walked through Thornfield's Rose garden after the children had been put to bed, Edward stopped suddenly and turned to Caroline. "I received a letter from the Countess today," he said. "She has invited all of us, including me, to visit this summer." "That's wonderful," Caroline replied sincerely. "The children will be delighted." "Yes." He hesitated, then continued. "She specifically mentioned you in her invitation. It seems you made quite an impression." "She loves her grandchildren," Caroline said simply. "We share that in common." Edward studied her face in the fading light. "You do love them, don't you? Not as a governess caring for charges, but truly, deeply." "Yes," she admitted without hesitation. "I couldn't help it. They are part of my heart now." "And what of their father?" he asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Has he found a place in your heart as well?" The directness of the question took her breath away. Caroline looked up into his eyes, seeing vulnerability and hope mingled with fear of rejection. "Edward," she began, her voice unsteady, "you must know that I—" Their moment was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Winters, unusually agitated. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. Lord Blackwood has arrived and insists on seeing Lady Caroline immediately." Caroline felt the blood drain from her face. "Thomas, here at Thornfield, after months of apparent acceptance of the Duke's arrangement." "Did he say why?" she managed to ask. "Only that it is a matter of the utmost urgency concerning Lady Caroline's inheritance," Winters replied. Edward's expression hardened. "Show him to the blue drawing-room. We shall be there momentarily." When Winters had gone, Edward turned to Caroline, taking both her hands in his. "Whatever this is, we shall face it together. I will not allow him to disturb the peace we have built here." Thomas Blackwood stood by the fireplace when they entered, his thin face set in lines of disapproval. He bowed stiffly to the Duke, barely acknowledging Caroline. "Your Grace, I apologize for this unannounced intrusion," he began, "but a matter has arisen concerning Lady Caroline that could not wait for the niceties of formal correspondence." "Indeed," Edward's tone was cool. "I trust you recall our arrangement regarding Lady Caroline's residence here at Thornfield?" "I do," Thomas replied. "However, circumstances have changed. My solicitors have discovered a codicil to the late Earl's. Will that was previously overlooked?" Caroline felt her heart rate quicken. "What codicil?" Thomas turned to her, a strange mixture of resentment and grudging respect in his expression. "It seems your father made provisions for you beyond what was initially revealed. A trust in your name, separate from the entailed property, containing a significant portion of the unentailed assets, including your mother's personal fortune, which was never legally incorporated into the earldom's holdings. But all the assets were sold to cover my father's debts," Caroline protested, confusion evident in her voice. "Not all," Thomas corrected. "Your mother's investments were managed separately by trustees in London. They continued to generate income even as your father's fortunes declined. The trust comes to you upon either your 25th birthday or your marriage, whichever occurs first." Edward stepped closer to Caroline, his presence steadying. "And you have only discovered this now, Lord Blackwood, after Lady Caroline has spent months believing herself entirely dependent on your grudging charity." Thomas had the grace to look uncomfortable. "The trustees contacted me only recently. They had been attempting to locate Lady Caroline independently, unaware that I had already found her." "And the amount of this trust?" Edward pressed. "Is it sufficient to restore Lady Caroline's independence?" "More than sufficient," Thomas admitted, reluctantly. "With accumulated interest, it amounts to approximately £30,000. Caroline gasped. Such a sum would indeed restore her independence, allowing her to purchase a modest property and live comfortably for the rest of her life. "I see," Edward said, his voice oddly constrained. "Lady Caroline is to be congratulated on this fortunate turn of events." Thomas nodded stiffly. "I came personally to escort her back to London, where the trustees await to transfer control of the assets." "That will not be necessary," Edward stated firmly. "If Lady Caroline wishes to meet with the trustees, I shall arrange for appropriate accompaniment. She need not leave Thornfield until and unless she chooses to do so." Thomas looked as though he might object, then thought better of it. "As you wish, Your Grace. I shall inform the trustees that Lady Caroline will contact them at her convenience." He turned to Caroline. "Cousin, despite our differences, I am pleased that your father's foresight has secured your future. It was never my wish to see you reduced to certain circumstances." After Thomas had departed, Caroline stood in stunned silence, trying to absorb the implications of this revelation. She was no longer destitute, no longer dependent on Edward's generosity. She could reclaim her place in society, perhaps even restore some portion of Rosewood Manor. "You are very quiet," Edward observed, studying her expression. "It's overwhelming," she admitted, "to go from believing I had lost everything to suddenly having options, choices, including the choice to leave Thornfield," he added, a note of resignation in his voice. Caroline looked up at him sharply. "Is that what you think I wish to do?" "It would be perfectly understandable," Edward replied carefully. "You came here out of necessity, not choice. Now that necessity no longer exists." "Edward," she said softly, moving to stand before him, "do you truly believe that necessity is all that keeps me here now?" His eyes searched hers. What I believe is that you deserve the freedom to choose your own path, not one dictated by circumstance or obligation. And if I choose to stay, she asked, her heart pounding, then I would need to know why, he answered, his voice dropping to a whisper. Why would an independent woman of means choose to remain at Thornfield? Caroline took a deep breath, gathering her courage. For the same reason I have remained these past months, for the children who have become dear to me beyond words, for the home that has become more truly mine than Rosewood ever was. She paused, then added softly, for the man I have come to love. Edward's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room. For a moment that seemed to stretch eternally, he stood perfectly still, his eyes never leaving hers. Caroline, he finally said, her name like a prayer on his lips. I have no right to ask this of you. I am older, widowed, with the responsibility of 2 children. I deserve to choose my own happiness, she interrupted gently, and I choose you, Edward. I choose Elizabeth and James. I choose Thornfield and all it represents, not as a refuge from poverty, but as the place where I found myself. Again, slowly, reverently, Edward took her hands in his. I thought I would never feel this way again, he confessed. After Alexandra died, I believed that part of me died with her. But you, with your courage, your intelligence, your love for my children, you awakened something I thought lost forever. And now? Caroline prompted when he fell silent. Now I find myself in love with a woman who entered my home under false pretenses, he said, a hint of his old humor returning. A woman who challenged my isolation, refused to be intimidated by my moods, and somehow taught me to live again rather than merely exist. He knelt before her, still holding her hands. All ducal dignity set aside in this most human of moments. Lady Caroline Huntington, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife, mother to my children, and mistress of Thornfield Hall, not out of necessity, but out of love? Tears of joy sprang to Caroline's eyes as she gazed down at the man she had come to love so unexpectedly. Yes, Edward, with all my heart, yes. As he rose and gathered her into his arms, their lips meeting in a kiss that promised healing for past wounds and hope for future joy, Caroline marveled at the journey that had brought her here, from Countess to stable hand to Duchess, a transformation no one could have predicted, least of all herself. Later that evening, as they told the children of their engagement, Lady Elizabeth's eyes grew wide with wonder. So you will truly be her mother now? She asked Caroline. If you wish it, Caroline replied gently. I could never replace your mother, nor would I try. But I would be honored to love and care for you as my own. Master James, always practical, asked, will we still have riding lessons? Edward laughed, the sound of pure joy filling the room. Yes, James, some things will not change, but many things will improve, because Caroline will no longer be hiding who she truly is, the remarkable woman who taught all of us to live and love again. As summer bloomed over Thornfield, the Duke and his children, accompanied by the future Duchess, visited the Countess of Harewood. Old wounds began to heal as Edward and the Countess spoke openly of Alexandra for the first time since her death, remembering her joy and spirit rather than only the tragedy of her loss. In September, Caroline became the Duchess of Thornfield, in a ceremony attended by both the Countess and, surprisingly, Thomas Blackwood, who had eventually accepted that his cousin had found genuine happiness in her new life. And in the years that followed, Thornfield Hall was transformed from a place of shadows and grief to one of light and laughter, home to a family bound not by obligation but by choice, by love that had found its way through disguise to truth, through loss to healing, through separation to union. For Lady Caroline Huntington, once a stable hand out of desperate necessity, becoming the Duchess of Thornfield was not the end of her story but its true beginning. a life of purpose, joy, and love she could never have imagined when she first passed through Thornfield's gates. If you enjoyed this emotional historical romance about healing, second chances, and unexpected love, please subscribe to our channel. We bring you captivating stories every month featuring strong heroines, complex heroes, and the transformative power of love. Subscribe now to never miss our latest releases and join our community of romance enthusiasts who believe that true love can overcome any obstacle.